This idea of STEM being siloed is a really old idea. It's a cliche to say it, but we've got many complex problems to solve, and an interdisciplinary approach is going to be the way that we're able to make some headway and progress into creating a better world for ourselves.
Hello and welcome to the Pathway to Impact podcast series. My name is Madeline Arkins, Research Project Officer at UIN and your host for today. Join us as we gain valuable insights into the intersection of academia, the arts and community engagement in this week's episode with Dr. Rachel Morley, Associate Dean of Engagement in the School of Humanities and Communication Arts at Western Sydney University. In this episode, we explore the impact of curatorial engagements, the value of arts and humanities education in a changing world, and the exciting future plans for the Research Creation Showcase. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Rachel Morley. Rachel is a Senior Lecturer in Communication and Media, as well as Associate Dean of Engagement in the School of Humanities and Communication Arts at Western Sydney University. She's also a member of the Writing and Society Research Centre and the Digital Humanities Research Group. She teaches both undergraduate and postgraduate creative writing, networked writing cultures, and media studies, and received numerous awards for her contributions to student learning, and her research interests and publication areas span everything from literary and creative practice theories and practices in qualitative research, as well as postgraduate pedagogies. And Rachel also won the Regional Engagement Award at the UIN conference earlier this year for her presentation of this work of the Research Creation Showcase. So we're very excited to get to hear more about it here today. Rachel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Madeline. It's lovely to be here, and thanks for coming in so early in the morning as well.
You're welcome. Rachel, just to start us off, I would love to hear more about your role at Western Sydney University. What does being Associate Dean of Engagement in the School of Humanities and Communication Arts entail?
Yeah, sure. I'll just start by just acknowledging that I'm dialing in from the traditional lands of the Awabakal and Warramite people in what is commonly referred to and understood to be Newcastle, and I'm about 2 hours north of Sydney. So just to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and pay my respects to elders past and present, and just to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who might be joining us today. Yes, I'm Associate Dean of Engagement in the School of Humanities and Communication Arts, and that's at Western Sydney University, as you said. And very much my role is about helping to develop strong and strategic partnerships between our school and our staff and our students and the broader public, including industry and particularly the community, our creative arts organisations in our region. So I do a lot of work to develop teaching and learning partnerships, working with industry and the community, and also to help develop pathways to research as well. So it's a really exciting role where I get to broker relationships. I get to work closely with some really exciting and diverse stakeholders and then bring those opportunities back into the school. So I love the job, and it's incredibly nourishing and exciting as well.
I'm very glad to hear. I'm also curious, for those unfamiliar, what is the Research Creation Showcase at WSU and how did that come about?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's first started in 2014, I think, and it was actually initiated by a very good friend of mine and also colleague, Professor Hart Cohen. And Hart is a film and communication scholar and also a documentary filmmaker as well. And back in 2014, Hart really recognised that there was a lack of understanding about the power and impact and value of NTROs, so non-traditional research outcomes, particularly in the fields of creative practice. He recognised that they weren't necessarily always seen as real research and certainly not acknowledged in academic communities and being counted as well, particularly in publications. And so key to what he wanted to do was to develop a public forum that would enable our scholars and our artists within the school to be able to come together, to be able to exhibit their work, to be able to talk about the power of their practice, to be able to talk about how creative work is able to generate new ideas and knowledges, and to really, as the showcase has developed over the years, moving from just talking within the academy to really extending that research and extending those exchanges to the wider public as well. So in its first iteration and then continuing on into the more recent iterations, it's about bringing artists, students, scholars and the wider public, and particularly arts and artists from outside the community, to sort of talk about their work. And we do that through exhibition, through guest talks, through panel discussions, performances, and also through short lightning talks as well.
It's great to see that kind of platform being given to community arts, as well as artistic scholarship, because I think that kind of symposia, maybe however you would describe all that connection of events, is so common even in STEM, and yet that academic partnership is often so much rarer to find for the arts. So it's great to see. I also wanted to ask you about the partnership with Casula and see how that played a role in this wonderful event.
Yeah, absolutely. So partnership with Casula was where Research Creation Showcase took on a new life, as it were. And that was the event last year that I spoke about at the conference. So prior to 2022 and prior to COVID, we had run the event at a range of different locations. So we'd run it on campus at Parramatta, one of our campuses. We'd also run it at a range of different regional art galleries as well, but smaller scale. Typically, the event went from, say, 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and we had no parallel sessions. We just had a kind of consecutive program of one session per time slot. But then 2020, 2021, we ran the showcase online, and moving into 2022, we're in that, like so much of the world, in that kind of iffy space of, if we put something on physical, will it happen or will we be shut down? And we decided we're just going to take that big risk and aim for a physical big event, and just recognizing just how much the arts and creative communities, including researchers at the university as well, had really been impacted by COVID, by the pandemic, and by so many arts and theatres and arts organisations having to close down or to have to at least suspend their programming. Some real inequities around funding during that period as well. And just that our artists and creatives were craving community, they were craving networks and craving to be together. And so we were able to build on a partnership with Casula Powerhouse that we had been developing over the pandemic years. Casula Powerhouse Arts Centre is located in Liverpool, which is in the Western Sydney region, and they're a multidisciplinary, really large and exciting arts institution where they've got lots of spaces. They're located by a river, and most importantly, they have fantastic creative leadership. Craig Narski, the director of the gallery and the space, is such an advocate for the arts and for Western Sydney. It was really exciting to partner with Craig, with Casula, and put on what became a 12-hour event with a number of different sessions programmed. And we just really did what was called like a takeover. We ran this festival from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. and had hundreds of people attend. And it was just, fabulous.
Yeah, it sounds it. I wish I was there. I wish I had experienced it in person, hearing you speak about it. One aspect we talked about, artistic incubation. We so often hear about business incubation, deep tech incubation. And from the other side of things, it certainly is rarer to hear about universities taking on the responsibility of artistic incubation and curatorial engagement. How do you see that those kind of activities play a role in the university's overall strategy? Where does that fit in terms of WSU's mission and goals?
With the showcase itself, that's like a small scale, in a way, example of what we're talking about here in terms of artistic incubation. I think that part of our goal with Research Creation is to provide a platform for artists and creative practitioners to be able to showcase their work, share their work, and network with other creative people, network with policymakers in the arts and creative spaces, network with other artists, network with other institutions. And so the showcase, especially last year, but I think certainly for the years that we're moving ahead into as well, is about providing that space. And so in that way, it becomes a politically hot area, because the arts and funding and recognition of the role and value of the arts is political in so many ways. And I think then more broadly, Western Sydney University is what we call an anchor institution in the region. And by that, I mean that, yes, it is the sole tertiary provider for Western Sydney, but I think more importantly, it is deeply embedded in the community. It has 13 different campuses. And key to that is the university has genuinely made a comprehensive, detailed, and importantly funded commitment to the arts and to creative practices. And part of that is this idea of being an incubator, importantly fostering, supporting, cultivating, and helping to be an agent of change. And there are a bunch of ways that the university is doing that, but a key way is that in 2019, the university released the Arts and Culture Decadal Strategy, which is a 10-year strategy that was born out of deep engagement and consultation with the multiple sectors across the arts and practices across Western Sydney. And then it's established a centre called the Western Sydney Creative, which is a centre in-house that's run by an incredibly experienced team whose job it is to spend the next 10 years investing and consulting deeply and widely, but doing the deep research as well to work out what are the key issues in Western Sydney when it comes to arts and creative practices and culture. How do we support a rich economy? How do we support that the region gets funded by our local governments, state governments, and federal governments? How do we ensure that the Western Sydney is recognised for what it is, which is an area of rich and vibrant practice? Because of where Western Sydney is, and it's often compared to East Sydney and the Opera House and those kind of more typically privileged areas. Western Sydney has traditionally been left lagging in terms of the commitments that governments have put into it. So the university is committed to doing the research. It's committed to ensuring through learning and teaching that it's helping to create the right environment, opening access and kind of reducing the barriers to students coming and getting an education in these spaces, and then to building strong communities. So very recently, the Western Creative, as one of the really important outcomes, released the State of the Arts report, which is a highly detailed, researched and consultative document that sets out its agenda for the next several years on where are the issues, where are the gaps, and what must happen in order to ensure that the region is able to perform at its best.
That consultation piece is so important also, because I think that's often a criticism of academia, is that it can be so far removed from the region that it itself draws so much resources from. So it's great to see that sort of stuff is happening.
And importantly, the report includes multiple case studies and profile pieces on all of the different arts and cultural sectors and organisations that are helping to cultivate and to be able to show this rich diversity of practices. And through that, some of the key recommendations, which Western Sydney Creative and the university is really committed to, is ensuring that there's a really big focus on gender inequality and ensuring that there's widening participation and opportunity for women in the arts, particularly at senior levels, focus on Indigenous Australian arts and intellectual property, and again, ensuring that there's opportunities for leadership and participation. And then thinking about, equitable investment in the arts and cultural practices as well, particularly around diversifying who's at the table in these conversations too.
Yeah, what you had said earlier about like arts and culture and funding for it is certainly political. And I think, I'm from an arts and humanities background myself, and I think that it has been the tendency in recent years to really steer both funding, but also students towards a route away from arts and humanities. And I know in your role, you really have to show the value of this kind of path, how lucrative it can be, how fulfilling, and how important it is to communities. How do you do that with students? It's one thing to advocate it more regionally into policymakers, but how do you show that value to your own students?
I think as part of that, it's also about showing the value to their parents as well, because parents are influential in helping students to, or perhaps directing some students in terms of the decisions that they make. And we had our open day recently at the university, and one of the questions that we overwhelmingly get over the recent years, but especially this year, is how current and how valuable is an arts degree or a degree in creative practices going to be with AI, with the shutdown of so many media organizations, with all of the shifts that are taking place in creativity. We have to have those conversations with the parents as well. And I guess the answers have to change too, because the answer that I would have given, that I believed in a couple of years ago, is a different answer to the one that I have to give now, because a couple of years ago, I would have said creativity is an inherently human skill, and it is the human beings who tell the stories and who write the novels and the poems. But we've all seen what ChatGPT can do, and ChatGPT can write a poem. Is it any good? Who's to know? But we're in early days there. So I think the way that we show value is by taking these stories, these partnerships back to the students when they're in the classroom. We have put a big emphasis on what we call work integrated learning. So bringing in our partners as guest speakers, bringing them in with real world briefs that the students get to work on and pitch back to them, getting students to go on site and go and visit different creatives as well. And for them to be able to, as part of that, understand the way that jobs and career pathways are just increasingly diversifying. They're different to what they were 5 years ago. They're different, of course, to when I first started out. And for them to begin to learn the languages around that and to learn those important transferable skills that are germane to an arts humanities program, which is around collaboration and critical thinking and creativity, entrepreneurship as well. And these are really critical skills that students can take into whatever career path they go into. But it's about being able to adapt and be flexible and take that with them. And a humanities arts program is always going to have a role to play. And I think that we're just seeing that AI and other kinds of technologies, they're changing the landscape, but they're not going to make human beings redundant anytime soon, of course.
Yeah.
And so I think it's about showing the way that a career in the broad humanities, communications, creative industries is exciting, is relevant, is important, and getting the students to meet and engage deeply with industry.
Yeah, and I think that storytelling piece, it's almost like meta storytelling. You need to tell the story of this narrative of how these human skills and creative skills are so needed, despite the direction that we may be going in.
Yeah, and I think just to jump in as well, we know too that this idea of STEM and the idea of it being siloed is such a really old idea now. It's a cliche to say it, but the fact is that we've got many complex problems to solve, and an interdisciplinary approach is going to be the way that we're able to really do the work in order to try to. We can't solve so many of these problems, but we can try and make some headway and some progress into creating a better world for ourselves. And we see the interconnections between health sciences and the arts, increasingly between computer sciences and engineering and other technology related fields. They need the arts and the arts needs them. So it's very interconnected.
Rachel, you just told me you were back from New York recently. I would love to hear about the Bite the Big Apple initiative and what that entails for students and what that looked like.
Yes, that's very true. I'm just back from New York, and I was there for 2 weeks with my colleague, Dr. Nicole Bridges, and 12 students. So the undergraduate students from communications, creative industries, and design. And we also had a couple of tourism and heritage students with us as well. So the tour was called The Bite of the Big Apple, and it's the brainchild of my colleague, Nicole. She is a self-confessed New York fan, and she had hoped to run this tour in 2020, but of course, things didn't go quite according to plan. So this year was the first year she was able to run it. And I had the great fortune of being invited along to help support her and to also bring some of that experience that I have in arts and cultural engagement and industry partnership too. So the idea behind the study tour was for these students to be able to get that realization and understanding of the global opportunities that their studies can bring them. So for them to see that there's global international application of what they're learning, for them to be able to see New York. For many of them, they hadn't left Australia before. And so it was that chance to be able to learn those new languages around the ways in which their disciplines might work in that international context, to be able to also get the opportunity through the different partners that they met, that perhaps what they imagined they might do as public relations practitioners or as designers might actually be much broader than what they had imagined. Over the 2 weeks, we did loads of sightseeing, but we also met with a number of different organisations who gave the students a bespoke industry exclusive insight into their practice. So we had a couple of days of learning with Pace University and Professor Emily Zaslow, who helped set the scene, thinking about media, race relations, and gender from an American perspective. And then we spent time with We Communications, Red Havas Communications Agency, both major global communications and PR agencies. Arup, who are international as well, and they do incredible work across a range of different cultural organisations. We spent time at the Jazz Lincoln Centre, also with Ping Chong and Co. We saw some theatre and went to some album launches and got to have exclusive talkbacks with the directors and major musicians, and a number of other organisations we met with as well. So it was just phenomenal, and the kind of access that the students had was really life-changing, I think, not just for them, but also for us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm jealous. I would have liked to be on that trip. And great that something like that is offered for undergraduate students, even
Yes.
from that level, to see the kind of roles that are out there, and the international level of the availability of them is also huge at that age.
A big part of our program is to offer these kinds of experiences. The students get some support from the federal government as well, and then they're able to use that as part of their course credit with some assessments that are attached to.
Okay, fabulous. Yeah. We do have one question in the chat that I might ask you. It says, "Hi, Rachel, how does the university measure the success and impact of these curatorial engagements you mentioned? And what metrics do you use to evaluate the effectiveness of these initiatives?" Great question. We always love impact.
Thank you, Fred. With the Research Creation Showcase, that is, I have to say, an area that we are working on in terms of evaluation of impact. In the past, we've tended to measure that through the numbers of people who come and the levels of interest in terms of who applies and wants to be part of the program. And I guess also through a kind of informal sentiment analysis of the kinds of conversations that we hear taking place, the feedback that we get from people. But particularly after my UIIN experience this year, I came back to the very small working party that we have to talk about how we can begin to do some more work around documenting impact and evaluation. But more broadly within the university, there are certainly different measures that the different organisations that we have call on, and that, say, the Writing and Society Research Centre that I'm part of, they do very extensive both qualitative and quantitative analysis of the impact of their programs, who they're reaching, what's the participation and what's changed for those participants who've been involved, and thinking about reach and impact around who's attending, who's reading, particularly if there's digital resources that are being produced as a result of some of these partnerships, being able to look at who's accessing, how long they're accessing for, and the kinds of rates of return and sharing of materials as well. But we can see through the data, again, through the State of the Arts in Western Sydney, they've set some very tangible and very concrete measures that they'll continue to report back on to ensure that they're meeting those targets and delivering to the region in a way in which they promised to do so.
Great. Yeah, with anything in the arts and humanities, I feel like that data points for measuring that impact is so much more long-term and so much more qualitative, and as such, maybe more difficult to measure, but it's great to see that there's ambitious targets in how to measure that.
Yeah.
Maybe as a closing question, Rachel, what are the aspirations or future plans of the Research Creation Showcase?
We're in the process of planning for the 2023 Research Creation Showcase, and this time we've moved the showcase to the Blue Mountains. So the Blue Mountains is further west of Sydney again, and the mountains is historically a very dynamic and engaged community of artists and also artist scholars as well. So we've partnered with the local Blue Mountains Council for the showcase this year, and working closely with school communities too, to deliver a smaller scale in terms of the duration of the event, but we hope a larger audience numbers again. to come this year. And we're seeing the ways in which the showcase can now be a mobile event that's able to work with different communities. And then to be ensuring that we are keeping those strong relationships and partnerships going with those that we've previously worked with. For instance, in the Casula Powerhouse partnership, because of the strength of the event last year and some of those smaller pilot projects, we're now working on a really exciting development over the next 6 months that I'm not allowed to say anything about just yet. It's embargoed, but that all happens because of the goodwill that's built up. And we hope to bring those experiences this year to the mountains, next year to somewhere else. But I think going back to Fred's question about impact and evaluation, it's about also beginning to see, well, this really does play an important part. And the conference this year was a wonderful endorsement of the showcase event. So thinking deeply about how, with our very limited budget and our shoestring staffing of 3 people, how do we ensure that we are able to document impact, to be able to evaluate the event in such a way that it has stories to tell beyond the day itself, and that we can really keep building on that work?
Yeah, it's a tall order, but it sounds like you are all well on your way. I know the Research Creation Showcase was such a hit to hear about at the conference itself, and even just to hear that that kind of model has the potential to be moved around and brought to other communities is also just a sign of its success. So thank you for sharing, Rachel, and best of luck with next year.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity, and just again for the fantastic work that the network does.
Thanks, Rachel.
My pleasure. All right. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the discussion. Follow UIN on LinkedIn, and if you're enjoying our podcasts, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review on your podcast platform of choice to help others find this content too.